Steller's sea ape was first observed by Georg Wilhelm Steller in the early 1700s off the coast of Alaska, and was first described as a North American mermaid by me, in an attempt to make this video more favorable by the algorithm. Anywho, Steller was a German naturalist, not to be confused with a German nationalist, who became part of the Great Northern Expedition in the 1740s. This was a Russian effort to map the coast of Siberia, Alaska, and newly discovered islands in the area. But Steller was more interested in studying the wildlife, which he did. A lot. He discovered countless animals that have never before been seen by European eyes, and forever modest, he decided to name all of them after himself. I present to you Steller's sea eagle, Steller's sea lion, and Steller's sea cow. However, one of these creatures stood out from the rest, and this is because no one but Steller himself has ever seen one, past or present. This was, of course, Steller's sea ape, or as Steller himself called it, the Danish sea ape. Why'd he say it was Danish if it was found near Alaska? I don't know, zoologists are stupid. Anyway, in his journal he claimed that he found the sea ape on August 10th, 1741, off the coast of an Alaskan island. He wrote that he observed the creature for over 2 hours before going on to describe it. According to him, it was over 6 feet tall and had a dog-like head. Why did he name it a sea ape if it looked like a dog? Again, zoologists are stupid. Moving on. It had tall pointed ears and whiskers that hung down from both sides of its upper and lower lips, giving it the appearance of a beard. It was long and fat and covered with thick fur, whitish gray by the head and reddish as it went further down. Finally, perhaps most puzzling of all, it was described to have a shark-like tail, meaning it moved side to side and not up and down like every other aquatic mammal. Anyway, like I said before, Steller was the only person to ever see this thing, so what was it really? Well, a lot of people think that Steller just misidentified a real animal, like a sea otter or something. A lot of people have latched onto it specifically being a juvenile fur seal. I don't know why they thought it had to be a baby, considering it was supposed to be 6 feet long, and something tells me that baby seals are a little bit smaller than that. But regardless, this explanation doesn't really make sense if you think about it. That's because most of the animals that could have been the true identity of the sea ape are described elsewhere in his writings, and he describes them being separate from the sea ape. It just seems weird that he wouldn't be able to identify an animal he already knew, especially when you factor in that he watched the man for 2 hours, giving him plenty of time to realize what he was looking at. Now, if you're a guy like me, then at this point in the story, you're probably thinking that this was just a hoax, a classic shenanigan. But again, while that can't be completely disproven, it doesn't seem likely. If this was just some random Joe off the street, then yeah, that'd be the clearest answer for this. But this guy was an actual professional. He came to those islands, to a frozen tundra, for the sole purpose of discovering and describing wildlife. Not to pull a prank on the scientific community that no one would even realize was a prank until many decades later. And think about this, if that was his goal, then he didn't really commit to it at all. Like I said before, the sea ape is the only animal in all of his writings that hasn't been seen by anyone else. If we were to believe that this man was a bona fide clown, then surely he would have filled his pages with unexplainable beasts. On top of that, the sea ape itself isn't even that outlandish in the first place. It's not like this man spat fire or had a dozen heads. The only weird thing about it, really, was its slightly unconventional tail. So it's not a very compelling prank. That is, if the target of the joke was the scientific community. But believe it or not, there's another explanation that's similar to that last one, but makes a little bit more sense. But first we'll need to talk about Steller's crew. Steller didn't start off on a good foot with the rest of his crewmates, especially the captain, Vitus Bering. This was, in part, because he missed the ship's departure. This meant they needed to make a brief detour on a coast to pick him up. Because of this, Bering restricted how often he was allowed to go out and observe wildlife. You know, the whole reason he was there in the first place. These restrictions were so strict that he was only allowed to explore one time for a grand total of 10 hours. And that was only because the ship was resupplying anyway. It got to the point where the officers on board wouldn't even let him give berries to the rest of the crew when they came down with a bad case of scurvy. This was around the same time that Steller first documented the sea ape. Again, most of this contempt towards Steller came from Bering, so it's not too hard to believe that Steller shared the same contempt towards him. Bering, in case you were curious, was a Danish man with a thin beard that hung off his upper and lower lips, kind of like whiskers. Wait, hold on a second. Danish? Whiskers? Sea? No, that can't be true. But as far as anyone can tell, it is. All along, the Danish sea ape was just Steller daydreaming about a man that he hated being a fat, ugly sea monster. This becomes even more convincing when you realize that Steller seemingly forgot to mention the creature's facial hair and the Danish part of its name, in the official documentation, leaving that only in his personal journal. A journal that was only published after Steller's death, which I imagine would make it very difficult for him to explain that the sea ape was just a joke and to leave it out of the published version. So there you go. I wouldn't say it's the most straightforward explanation, but I would say it's the one that makes the most sense, at least to me. Guess you could see it as an alternative to Occam's razor. Steller's sea ape. The principle that sometimes the funniest solution is also the most plausible. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, don't die. See you later.